Hello, everybody. Sorry for that little momentary outage. Nothing I could do about it. It's not to do with the platform. It's just Wi-Fi. Sometimes it comes in and comes out. But yes, I'm back, waiting for you guys to appear and arrive. Hi, Remy. Welcome back again. Thank you. I'm just going to give the others a moment to find the stream again, and then we'll just pick up where we left off. Sorry for the interruption. It's totally just a random thing. Maybe you've seen some things like that happen in your other classes at times, but we just do our best. Hi, Oliver. Good to see you again. See that there's 5 of us back already, so that's all good. Philip, thank you. I'm going to wait until we get up to about the same number that we had. Hopefully we didn't lose too many people or find anyone distracted and then just decided to skip the meeting. Hi, Corey. Hi, Alex. Lan, rather. Philip, everybody. Good to see you guys. So yeah, well, here's what I had to do actually, because the other stream was kind of caught in like a loop because I had to take off the Wi-Fi that wasn't working, connect to the mobile hotspot, but in the process of doing that, it makes it so that the other stream can no longer really be resuscitated. Therefore, I had to delete it. So that means that we did lose a couple minutes from the record, but what you can do, which should be easy enough, if you want to gain access to the topics and comments that we just talked about at the first 20 minutes of class, then you can just look at the video playback from the previous hour. I have the same exact class, just a different section. That's from 12:45 to 2:10 every Tuesday, Thursday. So when you go back into the video queue, if you want to look at things later and play them back for review, you can find a video lecture posted from today, which says May 11th, 12:45 to 2:10, and you can just watch the first 20 minutes of that if you want to replay any of the instructions about homework 4 or about our initial discussion of what even ethics is about, the study of morality, the different contrasting moral concepts and those things. So that will stay on the record for people that want to go back and refer to it. I don't know if you guys have any kind of group chat or something that connects you with each other as members of this class. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you have any such thing, try to tell the other members to come back. I'd rather we don't lose half the class members, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so I guess I'll just continue going from here to the others that aren't here yet. Hopefully they'll find us. But back to what I was saying. So morally impermissible. I was asking a question. I don't know if you got the question, but the question was, what do you think would be the meaning of that concept? If an action is morally impermissible, what do you think that means about it? What kind of action is a morally impermissible one? If you were going to say guess or take a stab at that, what do you think? To be morally impermissible would mean what? 3 types of actions in ethics. We're starting with the first one here and just trying to see what your common sense would tell you about that. I say someone did something morally impermissible. What am I saying about the action? Hey, Anna, Elizabeth, good to see you guys. Glad you're back. So let me know. I know there's some that are still arriving. Okay, Lan, so here's the question though. Lan, that's okay, you gave me an example though, but I'm rather asking what the genre is of a morally impermissible action. Okay, so Philip, you say an immoral action. Nathan, you're going so cultural relativist. You're something that is seen as a social taboo that goes against a collective agreed rule. Okay, but I'd rather say wrong, because your answer presupposes that morality is just determined by social customs and agreement. If there was a culture that said, let's all sacrifice children, and you didn't want to do it, then you'd be wrong or something, because they would not agree with that. But let me tell you that although I know there's a lot of moral relativism, and a lot of people just assume this because you're thinking morality is subjective. I mean, there's no fact about whether something's wrong or not. It's just what we decide. You'd maybe be surprised to know that the dominant strain of thinking in philosophical study of ethics is that morality is universal and it's not subjective to one person or even one society. But that's a topic that we're going to get into as we develop this in the rest of the lectures. Anyway, though, I'm just trying to add a little bit of a note of nuance to what you've said, Nathan, because you're saying morally impermissible is just society. So anyway, overall, yeah, Matthias, Oliver, and everybody, it's something that's wrong. It's something that is morally wrong, and it's just not okay to do. So these are actions that are wrong in the moral sense of being wrong. And to put it maybe less formally, they're just things that they're not okay to do. Doesn't mean they're not possible to do, sadly. I mean, people can do them, but they're not okay morally when people do them. So, given that definition, let me ask if you have any examples. Now, Lan, you can talk to me about examples. So I'll go back to your earlier comment. Taking the life of another human being, murder, in other words. That's one of the morally impermissible acts. I think we can all agree on that, but it's one of the worst. You know, taking the life of a person that's innocent, like maybe if you're a serial killer doing it for no good reason, just for sadistic pleasure, is clearly something that's on the wrong side of morality. So that would be wrong, and it's not okay, even though people do it all the time. Not many of them, but you know, the murder happens every day somewhere. Well, what about another example? So we say murder's one thing that's morally impermissible. True enough. What about something else? Bad stuff. So torture. Okay, there you go, Philip. Yeah, torturing people. Murder, torture. You guys are really getting into some dark material. Yeah, those are bad. They're high on the scale of wrong actions. What about other things that are wrong, but maybe they're not as serious or consequential as murder or torture? Good examples for sure, but anything a little less heavy that's also on the realm of bad, immoral actions that are not okay. Okay, stealing, there you go. Corruption, yes. Corruption could be, you could say something a little more specific, but wow, two different people with the same thought. Okay, so corruption it is. Yeah, I was only saying, I was trying to pose like some comment to that because corruption, I was thinking about what? Or can we be more specific, but sure. Okay, so let me think about stealing. Yeah, stealing, taking property that doesn't belong to you. I was recently a victim of theft. I think I told you guys that just a couple weeks ago. Someone broke into my car, smashed a window, and took an expensive guitar out of the back seat. So that was a hassle for me because I had to get the window replaced and I had to talk to insurance. So yeah, theft. Now, let me say this though. There's some cases where there's like gray areas. Some people might argue that maybe there are isolated examples where theft wasn't wrong. Like maybe you've heard of like Robin Hood, steal from the rich, give to the poor. Some people might argue that like there's a noble act of theft, but in the general case, yeah, we know that that's something that's not to be approved of morally. So a fair example of an action that's wrong or not okay. And I'm not even saying the Robin Hood example is okay either, but just pointing out that some people might argue to that conclusion. Lying, okay, yeah, Oliver, fair, yes. And same to you, Elizabeth. Once again, though, with lying, there are, I think, gray area cases. Somebody asks you, how do I look today? And you think they just look horrible or something, but you're like, oh, no, you're looking great. In that case, you might say, well, it was a lie, it wasn't truthful what I said, but in the end, it was done for a good reason. But overall, yeah, lying is morally frowned upon, and it's not regarded as a good moral action. Nathan, you're saying I'm having a hard time understanding why morality is more commonly accepted as being non-subjective. Is it because if we were to assume that morality isn't universal, it would be difficult to discuss? Well, Nathan, it's because if morality was just conventional, then there are some things that are intuitively wrong that would not be deemed wrong. Like in cultures where child sacrifice was practiced, you would have to say that that's not wrong. But over here, we have a different culture, and in our culture, it is wrong. Don't you think that's weak, Nathan? Don't you think it's weak to just say people torturing people, killing them, like if you're gay or something and you live in like, I don't know, some countries in Africa, you know, there are laws that say you could just be executed. Now, you might just be sort of a moral nihilist, and you're like, yeah, well, there's no fact. You know, that's a different culture. They have a different definition of right and wrong than we do. So we can't say for sure that there's a pure, absolute, objective fact that like marrying children is wrong, or that sacrificing them is wrong, or that executing gay people is wrong. But Nathan, the reason that the consensus of many moral philosophers is that it's universal is because there's dominant intuitions that there are some things that are objectively wrong. And if you think that it's all relativistic, then you'll never be able to say anything like that. All you'll be able to say is depending on this person, or depending on this culture, or depending on this point in time in history. And there's deeply felt moral intuitions that people think could be grounded on objective moral facts. So, I don't know. That's all I can say. That is like the overall consensus view. But there is moral relativism, there's cultural relativism, and there's ethical subjectivism. So, to be fair, Nathan, yes, there are people that don't think that morality is universal, and we will talk about those theories too. But I'm just trying to voice to you so that you understand that it is not like a given, and it is not even the majority position that morality is subjective. People argue that, and there are intelligent people who will give reasons for that, the reason could probably be something like, well, what could it be based on? You know, if it's universal, what does that mean? It's not like math. One person thinks abortion is wrong, another person doesn't. Isn't that just a difference of opinion? I know what you're thinking, but if we go all the way to say that it's purely subjective, then we no longer have any moral ground to stand on. We can just say, well, there's just different opinions. If there's a world where everyone's killing babies, you know, torturing them, and they think that's a sacrifice to the gods, then whatever, we can't really say it's wrong, just different beliefs. Many people don't find that to be plausible or intuitive because it's just deeply felt that there's something wrong. So we're talking about intuitions. I don't know, intuitions. People that are religious believe in moral universalism because they would say that it's God that determines the moral law and it's not up to the individual. So if it says like thou shalt not kill, commit adultery, I don't know, steal, murder, whatever, then that would be wrong. On the other hand, there are people that think morality can be derived from reason. That reason, which we have, which can discover principles of physics, mathematics, that can invent technology, is also capable of discovering the moral law. So there's a landscape of views, and I'm just trying to show you all the possibilities that do exist. But I don't want you to overly, you know, commit to the thought that there's just subjective morality, even though I know that that's like the kind of common sense, untutored, pre-philosophical view that most have, because you're living in a world where you've been told to be tolerant of everyone's different views. Okay. Slander, perhaps another good case, right? If you slander someone's name by spreading false information about them, another good case of a morally impermissible act. Okay, so to kind of summarize this point, there's all kinds of bad things. There's all kinds of things that, at least on a surface level, before we dive into all the details and nuances, we can probably fairly claim as wrong. If people are committing, I mean, there's even beyond murder, genocide, you know, like the Holocaust, that's like on a high level, like supremely wrong, most would agree. But murder, rape, torture, and then we go down the scale like to like personal lies that don't have much consequence, maybe petty acts of theft, and so on. Okay, well, that's not the only type of action in ethics, so we can flip to the next one, and that's just like the reverse, which is morally permissible actions. Okay, morally permissible acts. So let's see if you can think of the definition just based off of this, because morally impermissible, these are things that are wrong, they're not okay. So morally permissible is the reverse. What would you think could be that definition then? Morally permissible acts. Let me know. Because this is wrong stuff that's not okay. So then this would be blank, that is blank. What? The other definition. So just try to reverse it and see if you can get to the right statement. Actions that are right and okay to do. Basically, that's correct, Lan. There's only one slight edit that I would make to the way you put it. Instead of saying right, which I think implies like more nobility and like virtue, which is fair, I would rather have it stated a little more minimally, just as things that are not wrong. Okay, so here we go. These are actions that are not wrong. And in other words, yes, they are okay to do. So not wrong, and they're okay. Now, the point I was making about the distinction of the term right versus not wrong, when you hear the word right, you might think, well, that has to create like some kind of positive impact. Like, so when I donate to charity or give blood or, you know, volunteer to work at the that mass vaccination site as like a nurse's orderly or whatever, if you do something like that, someone might say you really did a good thing that was right. But there's also all kinds of other actions that are not necessarily creating a huge benefit or positive impact, but they're also not wrong because they just don't harm anybody or they don't violate any kind of moral standards. So let me ask you then, as we've discussed the definition, what do you think are some examples of morally permissible acts, acts that are morally permitted? And I'll say this before you give me examples, that I think you guys seem to be a good moral group of people. So that would be, I hope, easy for you to come up with examples, because looking at your own life, probably what, 90+% of everything you're doing is in that category, because hopefully you're not doing a lot of wrong things. So if you're struggling to think of anything that's not wrong, then that's a little scary. But yeah, what do you think are some things that are just, they're not wrong and they are okay actions to do? That could go all the way to like noble, virtuous acts of self-sacrifice that are benefiting people, or it could also be little daily things that just don't harm, that are not morally blameworthy. So let me hear from you some examples to fill in the concept of morally permissible acts. Anything at all that's not wrong. You had no problem telling me wrong stuff. If it's easier to think of wrong things. Okay, so good there, Matthias. Riding a bike, sure. Is it a stolen bike though? No, just kidding. But yeah, in general, the action of riding a bike is not in itself an immoral act. It's just a mode of transportation, and if you're riding the bike, no one should say to you, hey, shame on you, get off of that bike. What the hell? That's evil. Giving money to the needy, okay, and that one is a little more, beneficial and etc. But it's morally permissible for sure. Helping an elderly lady cross the street, yeah. If you did that out of just a moment of kindness and concern, then no one should say that you did a wrong thing, just according to intuition and common sense. Okay, good examples, guys. Now, like I say, and it seems you guys seem to understand by means of the examples that you gave, that a morally permitted act could be something that is like very virtuous, or it could just be something that fails to violate moral norms. So what if I wanted to go and withdraw $10,000 out of a bank account, my account, and spend it all on like a nice Rolex watch today? I'm not going to do that, but if I did, would that be morally permissible? Well, I would say yes, because it's my wealth, it's my money, and therefore I have a right, if I wish, to spend it on things. Would it be a wise choice? Would it be the most, I already have a nice watch. Do I really need another one that costs that much? Not necessarily. It would be totally just a flex or cosmetic thing, but you couldn't say it was immoral, because I have a right, I suppose, to use my money for whatever I want, including things that are frivolous that don't necessarily help people. What if after I bought the watch, I wanted to smash it on this table with a hammer? Now, that would be a really dumb decision because it would destroy the value of it. But since it would be my property, I guess I would be free to dispose of it in whatever way that I wanted. So anyway, morally permissible acts, they cover a big, broad ground. They also include things that are just weird and random, but they don't hurt anybody. If I want to sleep tonight in my kitchen instead of the bedroom, like just roll out a mat and sleep next to the fridge, it'd be an odd choice perhaps, but I would be morally permitted to do that. It's not wrong. It's not like in my own house sleeping in a different spot is immoral, but it is kind of an odd, unconventional choice. Okay, so anyway then, we see morally impermissible, wrong things, bad things that are not okay, even though people can and in fact do commit them. Morally permissible, actions that are not wrong and they are okay to do, all the way from like, sacrificing your life to save your child, all the way back to like, I don't know, chewing gum or something. Okay, then one more. So the third below will be morally obligatory actions. Morally obligatory. Okay, now, based again on just the words, maybe you can make a reasonable guess. What do you think it would be to say it's morally obligatory? So this is like going a little bit even beyond being permitted. Morally permitted means it's okay to do it, but morally obligatory goes farther. And what do you think it means with that word obligatory sitting there? Any guess? Definition of morally obligatory, what could that be? They're actions that what? Okay, so good, Philip, you say you have to do it. And, well, Matthias, you say should do it whenever possible. Kind of the same idea, but I think the most forceful and accurate way to put it is in terms of something you must do, because an obligation is supposed to be like a mandatory thing instead of an optional thing. So these are like actions you must do. And they would be wrong not to do them. Okay, so like morally permissible, you may do. Morally obligatory, you must do. So these are like morally optional, and these are morally mandatory. Now, this one might take a little bit of a moment to dream up some good examples, but let me see if you can. What do you think could be like a morally obligatory action? An action that it would be wrong if you didn't do it. So you really have to, or you must. If you didn't, it would be wrong. Anybody have a thought about that? So more than just being allowed, but being a requirement. A moral requirement, whether or not it's a legal one. We'll talk about the difference of law and morality in a minute, but let's see. You say calling the police after you hear a cry for help. Sure, yeah. I mean, many people would argue that if you're in a position to provide assistance and it doesn't place you at any risk, then it would be a moral obligation for you to provide that assistance. Some call that the duty of easy rescue. Like if there was a person drowning and all I have to do is like reach out my hand to save their life and it's at absolutely no risk or cost to me, then most people would say it's not just I'm permitted to help them, but I'm obligated to do it. Even that though, there's some realm of disagreement. Some people say, no, I should be entitled to have the liberty to remain uninvolved in other people's problems, and that would be compromised if I had a moral obligation to intervene when I think that there's someone in need. But I agree, and most I think do agree, that if there's no risks at all to you, then like making a phone call or lending a hand literally could be seen as a moral obligation. Now, let's see, save a child from being run over. Again, though, Matthias, so the duty of easy rescue is what I think a lot of moral philosophers argue does exist. But when the rescue becomes difficult or places yourself at high risk, then the moral obligation is less clear. So maybe I'm morally obligated to just kick open a door so that people in a burning building can get out when it doesn't threaten me. But I'm not necessarily morally obligated to run in there and risk my life in a heroic effort to save theirs. If I did it, it would not be wrong. But to say I'm obligated to do it and I have no permission to withhold on assistance that could risk my life, that I think is a bit too much. So just saying, when you say saving a child from being run over, I would have to think about the scenario in more detail. Like, is this an easy case to save them? Or does it mean that you have to like block the oncoming vehicle or rush out into traffic and maybe get hit? Not cheating on a test. Now, I like that example there, Lan, and let me say a bit about that. There's a logical connection between all of these actions and this category. So we say that morally impermissible acts are actions that are wrong and they are not okay to do, which when you think about it means that you have a moral obligation, what? To not do these things. Okay, so like if it's morally impermissible to murder, then you understand what I'm saying. You have a moral obligation then to not do that. So you're morally obligated to not perform any of these actions. And also, if you don't do your moral obligations, then that's wrong. So not doing what you're obligated to do is impermissible, and not doing what is impermissible is an obligation. Oliver, you say, so right, if cheating on a test is impermissible, then you're morally obligated to not do that. Just like if, I don't know, committing rape or something is morally impermissible, then you're morally obligated not to rape, and other actions besides. Oliver, you say taking care of your grandparents. And in general, you know, exceptional cases aside, I would probably agree with that. But just know that there's always, like in philosophy, the devil's in the details. So what if someone says to you, which grandparents? Are we talking biological or like custodial grandparents? Because sometimes people, as you know, have children that they don't intend to keep custody of. So they give them to adoption agencies or to foster care. And then the people that adopt or that take over guardianship become like the parents that they recognize in their life. So if you meant biological grandparents, it's not always necessarily true. Even when it comes to biological grandparents, by the way, there are also some exceptional cases there. Suppose that a person was raised in their biological family household, but they were abused very badly by both parents and grandparents. Then you would argue that they're actually you know, entitled to withhold on any kind of future aid or assistance because these people harmed them and, you know, caused trauma, etc. So some people will say I'm only morally obligated to the parents in case that they actually loved and cared for me. But if I was in a household and stuff and these parents are like on drugs or that they're, you know, I don't know, bad people, they're not treating others properly, then maybe you might say my obligation doesn't exist any longer. I know, Oliver, that that's a complex question or issue. Some people hold the stance that no matter how badly your parents treat you, you know, they brought you into the world, and so the obligation does exist. But there is some moral debate about some points like that, just to kind of add complexity and nuance to the suggestion. Okay, how about this? Making a promise. If a person makes a promise, they establish a moral obligation to do what they promised to do. If you don't want to be obligated to do something, then you should not promise to do it. So if I promise somebody I'll pick them up at the airport when they get there because they don't want to take like a Lyft, then they're at the airport and they're calling me saying, where are you at? I'm waiting for you. I should be morally obligated to pick them up, because if I wanted to have the freedom to not do it, then I should have said, maybe I can help you, but I'll let you know later. Once you've promised, you say, I swear, put it on everything, I give you my word, then you have established a moral obligation to follow through. So keeping promises and vows, like marital vows, honor and obey and remain faithful, could be another example. So promises kept, moral obligation. And maybe one other case I could refer to as well would be like providing payment for a service that was given to you. So like if you ate at a restaurant and they've fed you and served you the meal, don't you think that it's a moral obligation to pay at the end, not just morally permitted? It should be a moral obligation because you know the expectation of the exchange. You get food, they get money. And if you don't hold up your end of the exchange, then it's not like you did something that you were permitted to do. Now, I want you guys to notice that there is a difference between law and morality. Sometimes when people think about morality, they just simply think whatever the law says is illegal, that's what's wrong. Or whatever the law says is legal is morally acceptable. But there is a difference between law and morality. And the reason that that is recognized in ethics is because the law itself is not absolute in terms of right and wrong. There can be, and there have been, bad laws morally. Laws that permit people to do things that are in themselves wrong, or laws that forbid people from doing things that are not wrong. Another good example, man. Thank you. Yeah, feeding your children if you're a parent. So if you have assumed custody of these children, then it's not just that you're permitted to provide for their food and upkeep and housing, but that you have a moral obligation to do that. Okay, so I was talking about law versus morality. And I would love it if any of you guys could think of a case where there was a practice that was legal, but even if it was legal, it was just wrong. It was morally wrong, even though it was legal, at least at one point in time. Can you think of any historical type of practice that was legally allowed, but that it was not moral to do it, even when it was allowed under the law? Anybody give an example like that? So legal but wrong, at least maybe in history, if you don't want to go into something that's on the books now. Okay, yeah, there you go, Oliver. That's a good, I think, clear example. Slavery. So what is slavery? Everyone, you should know, it's treating human beings as other property to be bought and sold. With slavery, human beings were converted into labor and given no compensation. So like servitude and bondage, you will buy a person out of their family, you're selling off their kids, you're buying the father or mother at a slave auction. So human beings have a greater dignity that's inconsistent with being treated as property. Conversion therapy, another possibility. I'm not sure. I don't think it's legal in California anymore, but in some states maybe it still does exist. And you could argue that that's immoral even if it was allowed under the law. Burning people at the stake, right? Salem witch trials and things like that. So, in the case of slavery, the argument is, I think, totally reasonable to say that even though it was at one point legal, it was still wrong. And it's not like you can insist that law and morality are the same, because it wouldn't even make sense. Then what would be the basis for ever protesting a bad law? What would be the reason for civil disobedience? It would be like saying that when you're standing against the law and you protest a law that you think is unjust, that you're doing something immoral, right? So if you thought there was no difference between law and morality, then people like Harriet Tubman, who facilitated the escape of slaves using the Underground Railroad, that because they were committing crimes under the law that existed then, that they were actually in the wrong, and the slave holders and owners were doing something that was not wrong. Or, that if an escaped slave, him or herself, was prosecuted under the Fugitive Slave Act, that was just because the law allowed it, and the slave was doing something wrong because they defied the authority of the law, which said that they had to stay as a slave. So, going to the Holocaust, right? If you had given safe harbor to Jewish people while they were trying to exterminate Jews, then that might have been considered a crime under the Nazi laws. But those laws themselves were to be rejected because the entire legal system was corrupt and wrong. Even today, okay, some people disagree with some laws that we have currently. There's a lot of pro-life people out there, and to those people, the fact that abortion is legal in all the states after the Roe versus Wade decision is like a moral atrocity. So those people say that we have something right now that's legal, but it's wrong. And, there's a lot of people out there smoking marijuana and doing certain drugs. And to a lot of those people, maybe even some of you, you might say, well, I know there's federal laws against it, but it's not even wrong because it's not harmful to anybody, and the laws themselves are outdated and they need to be changed. So I'm being prohibited from doing something that's not really immoral. Anyway, if there was no distance between law and morality, then we could never make a moral criticism of any law, which is obviously false. We shouldn't think that the legislators are like omnipotent gods that are putting these laws into practice. So that means that there's always the room, at least, for bad law and bad policy. On the other hand, though, I don't want you to take it in a whole like nihilistic direction and thinking laws are just arbitrary and they have no connection to morality. For the most part, with some exceptions that are notable, we think that law reflects our shared moral compass to the best of our ability as a society or a culture, but it's not always the case, and when it's not, people protest and find fault with the body of law. Okay, so just so that we can understand that difference between law and morality. When you think about ethics, here's what I always tell students. When you think about ethics in the philosophical sense of right and wrong, to detach your mind from just adhering to whatever you think the law compels you to do or not do, I want you to think of ethics from the standpoint not of the citizen who's subject to law, but from the point of view of the legislator, him or herself, who has to weigh in and vote on what the laws ought to be. Okay, so like say that you were a senator in Congress, and a bill comes up before you that says legalize marijuana, yay or nay. And this bill actually might come up in the next congressional session. But anyway, suppose that you were an actual senator and this bill arrives on your desk. Now your question is this: for this thing to become the law, and when you're making, going to be able to defer to a higher court of authority. Well, whatever the law says I do, this is what I have to do, and I'll vote in accordance with what the law requires. Because no, you're the law maker. So you're actually making an original decision based on your own moral intuition about whether applying this bill into the law will be a good or a bad thing for society and all of its members. So I want you guys to think about laws and etc. in the moral sense, as the legislator would. Should this be a law or should it not be? Rather than the subject who's like, I need to follow these laws because I just don't want to get in trouble. And they say that it's bad not to follow them. So that's what I think morality just means. Okay, so just some discussion there. Now, when you judge an action, you oftentimes will classify it into one of these categories. It's either something wrong or it's not wrong and it is okay, or even more so that it's something you must do or you really ought to do it. Notice that not everything that's morally permissible is obligatory. I said to you that if I sleep in the kitchen tonight, it's not wrong, but I'm not obligated to do it either. On the other hand, everything that's a moral obligation is at least permissible because you cannot be obligated to do anything that's not okay. So not everything permitted is obligatory, but everything obligatory is at least permitted. Okay, so when you make judgments as an individual about whether you think something's right or wrong, or whether you think you should do or should not do something morally, that's what's called moral reasoning. Okay, so another term from our book, moral reasoning. That is simply when you make a decision, when you, the individual, make a decision about what's either right or wrong, or what you should or shouldn't do. Or could be about what you should or should not do morally. Okay, so that's moral reasoning. When you're the judge, when you're the one who says that's wrong, or that was really good and righteous, or you're looking at something and you're considering whether to do it, but you come to the conclusion, I shouldn't do that, or maybe I ought to do that. That's moral reasoning. And we live with moral reasoning. It's a fact of human life. Sometimes we're subject to the moral judgments of others, and sometimes we're in the position of moral judgment over other people's actions. Now, the next thing to discuss in this chapter 9 is information about different types of values. So they talk about the difference of moral and non-moral values. And I'm going to provide that here, and we'll talk about it too. So what we have are two types of values. So there are moral values, and then non-moral values. Moral values versus non-moral. Okay, so to start with the moral values, these are values that benefit you, but they also benefit other people. So they're beneficial all around. They're beneficial to you, and they're also a benefit to the people who you show these values to in your behavior. So values that benefit you and others, and they're considered good for their own sake. Okay, so I'm going to just highlight some of the main points here. They're values that are beneficial to both you, but also others. And they're also considered good. And here are some examples of those moral values. So it's stuff like this. It's stuff like forgiveness, justice, compassion. And we could go on and add more, but let's just leave it at that for the moment. Now, I'll try to explain some of these points. You cannot see the notes? Is it too blurry or something? Thank you for that. You said you couldn't get down more reasoning, stream too pixelated. Sorry, I understand perfectly well. And the reason, I'll type it into the chat. Thank you for letting me know. The reason I overlooked it and was continuing to write on the board is because normally I'm on Wi-Fi, and the bit rate is a little higher with Wi-Fi because it's a 5G Wi-Fi connection. So now that I'm on mobile data, it, I think, causes a little pixelation. So not to worry. Thanks for your help. I'm just going to type that out. So moral reasoning one time. Here, I'm going to write that in the chat. We make a decision. What is right or wrong, or about what you should or should not do. Okay, moral reasoning. Hopefully that's clear in the chat, and you can see the typed definition. Now, this information I will put into the chat too. So 2 types of values. Okay, so moral values, definition. Okay, so these are values that benefit you and others. And that are considered good for their own sake. Okay, and so examples, e.g., things like justice, compassion, no problem, thanks Nathan. Forgiveness, etc. Okay, so now with that in the chat, let me go back into what I was saying. Moral values. So as you can see written, they're values that are beneficial to you, but also to others, and they're considered good for their own sake, like, for example, justice, compassion, forgiveness, altruism, and all the rest. Tolerance could be like another one. Okay, let me put those in there too. Tolerance and altruism, 2 different words. I didn't put a comma or dashes, but hopefully you know that. Okay, so for example, suppose that you really value the concept of forgiveness, and that's a moral value that you carry with you through life. So you really value being willing to let things go, to forgive people, and to let them reestablish a nice, friendly relationship with you. So say that you are a forgiving person, and that's a value you have. Well, when you display it to others, when you forgive the person that maybe did something wrong to you, then that's a benefit to them, of course, because instead of being shut out from a future friendly, mutual relationship with you, they can now restore that type of bond and connection. So instead of being shut out, erased from your life, they get to continue on and to have that relationship. So it's a benefit to them as opposed to if you had held a grudge. But it's also a benefit to you too, to be forgiving, because now you can kind of let go of your feelings of resentment, hostility, and all the psychological burdens that come with holding grudges and never letting things go and just holding on to the anger and feelings of hostility. So there's a benefit to the one that you show forgiveness toward. There's also a benefit for you, the individual who's got that tendency. But here's the third thing. Sometimes, not hopefully not most of the time, or certainly not all the time, but once in a while, you'll show these values that are moral, and it won't work out to your benefit. So like sometimes there won't be a benefit. In case of this, have you ever forgiven somebody, and even though you did that and you're really nice, they still betrayed you again? Maybe that hasn't happened to you, or maybe it has, but if it hasn't, I'm sure you can imagine it, right? Like you let someone kind of be forgiven, you didn't hold on to the grudge, but yet they still double you, stabbed you in the back, or betrayed you again, even after forgiveness. So can that happen? Yes. But even when it does, we still think that the person's value of forgiveness was good on its own, for its own sake, even if it didn't lead to any type of outcome that served your benefit or interest. So anyway, again, when you hold these moral values, whether it's forgiveness, justice, compassion, tolerance, or altruism, do benefit those to whom you show the value. And they benefit you as well. But even when they don't lead to any benefit or good outcome, we still think it was a good thing just on its own that you were willing to forgive. How about justice? You treat people fairly and equally, and you don't show preference to some over others. So you treat people with justice. But maybe that same person who you were fair to treated you unfairly in return, so they didn't return the fair and just treatment. Can that happen? Sure, but even when it does, we still think that it was better on you to show and have that value. But for the most part, it will be a benefit to other people, because when you're fair to people, they're treated fairly, and that's to their benefit. But also you, the individual, who know that you're fair and equitable, you sleep better at night, you have a clear conscience, you know that you are doing good in the world, and so that's something that conduces to your benefit, psychologically, if not otherwise. Okay, so that's the pattern here. Moral values, they're good for others, they're good for you, and in occasional cases where they don't lead to anything really awesome in the end or positive, we still think it was not a benefit, but it's a good thing in and of itself that you were having that value displayed. Now, there's also non-moral values. Okay, so I'm going to now put the definition of that in the chat, and we'll talk about it. For non-moral values, these are more like self-interested and they're goal-oriented. So these are goal-oriented values. That are desired as a means to an end. So non-moral values. Goal-oriented values that are desired as a means to an end. And let me give examples of that. Examples include wealth, fame, popularity, prestige. Okay, so non-moral values like those. So consider what it is that makes you want wealth or to be popular or have a really well-known name or reputation, like you're prestigious or even famous. Why do people want these things? Well, they don't necessarily want them for the good they could do for anybody else. You want it because of your self-interest. So obviously you want to get wealthy and get money, but you're doing that because you think it will promote your own happiness, your personal happiness. So the end that is a means to is your own self-interest. And if you want popularity or fame or prestige, it's the same. People value these things. They hold these values when they make decisions and when they do things, but they only desire them because it serves their own interests. If a person thought that fame, wealth, popularity would make them unhappy, then they wouldn't care about them, right? So they're desired for the sake of the self-interest that you could get from it. Now, notice that these are not really desired for the sake of other people's benefit. It's not like you're trying to get wealthy just so that you can help the world. Or if you are, it's not merely because of the value of wealth. It's because also you value, like, I don't know, generosity or certain other moral values. So in and of themselves, the non-moral values are desired just for the sake of personal self-interest and your own well-being. Question, Matthias. You could have non-moral goal-oriented values that bring moral-oriented goals. At least that's the position of utilitarians as you see it. Right, yeah, well, utilitarianism, and so you seem to know a little bit about ethical theory, even though we're going to save the full discussion in our class for, next meetings. But yes, in utilitarian theory, which to other members of our class, quick preview of what we will lecture on in a week or so, one very famous ethical theorist of the West was named John Stuart Mill, and he had the theory of what's called utilitarian ethics. In utilitarianism, everyone's just pursuing personal happiness and pleasure. And so he thinks that everything is reducible to self-interest. He would say that there's no such thing as pure altruism, where you really just do it for the other person's sake. He would say, which I think what you're indicating, Matthias, that there's a self-interested motive in every kind of moral behavior. If I'm going to work at the food bank and help homeless people get through their day a little less difficult, then I'm doing it because of the nice feelings of warm, fuzzy self-regard that will be promoted by that. So you could argue that the desire for the pleasure of being moral is the underlying basis for what we call moral behavior. But not everyone agrees with Mill. There are other ethical theories. But from the point of view of utilitarianism, your comment is correct. If we assumed utilitarianism was true, then every value and desire would always be grounded on the pursuit of individual happiness. But yeah, so as I was just going to have some closing thoughts about non-moral values, the book mentions this too, that there is a long tradition in philosophy going way back to the ancient Greeks thousands of years ago, which says that a life which is fully complete and content is one that does incorporate the moral values into your behavior and your choices. So some people think, if I ever stop for a minute to care about anyone else, that's just going to be to my disadvantage. So I'm just going to focus on me, and that's all that I really care about. And whether or not I have to behave unfairly, non-altruistically, dispassionately, I'll do that because it's all about my own self-interest. But classical thought and even some contemporary psychology studies indicate that people have deeper and more abiding and long-lasting contentment and even self-satisfaction when they do have a healthy dose of moral values in their life and in their value system. So even from the point of view of self-interest, ironically, I don't know, maybe this speaks to your comment, Matthias, we should try our best to instill within ourselves some appreciation of the moral values, because a lot of people end up feeling like their life is superficial, hollow, not connected enough to other human beings when it simply becomes the sole pursuit of individual interest and ambition. So here's what the book says on it. You don't have to take my word for it, just kind of repeating classic ideas that are also somehow justified by some contemporary psychology work. What it says here is this. Studies support the claim, well, actually before that, Aristotle, thousands of years ago, 2,000 plus years ago, Aristotle believed that morality is the most fundamental expression of our rational human nature. It is through being moral that we are happiest, he argued. The association of morality with happiness and a sense of well-being is found in moral philosophies throughout the world. So the Western frame of mind on that can be traced back to ancient Greek literature and philosophy. But we see the same kind of arguments given in a lot of other world cultures, whether that's the East or Asian cultures too. Furthermore, studies support the claim that people who put moral values above non-moral concerns are happier and more self-fulfilled. I'm sure you guys have seen and heard about people that even achieve the heights of fame, popularity, wealth, and they're still depressed or even suicidal in some cases. Like people are not content. So what's missing in their life in some cases is a deeper bond and connection to others. And I'm sure you guys do know and understand just from your life experience, if nothing else, that when you're totally self-centered and you have no concern with other people aside from what they can do for you, this doesn't necessarily put you in the best position to have deep, abiding, and satisfying relations with others. Because when people know that you're not really in it for them, but just for yourself, then they don't go all the way and invest themselves in you emotionally or personally. So if you want to have really deep and abiding relationships and not just treat everyone like a pawn in a game you're playing, then you would also want to have some of these moral values, which are not just self-regarding. And that's what it does say. Again, it says moral values are those that benefit you and others and are worthwhile for their own sake. They include altruism, compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, justice. Non-moral values are goal-oriented. Now, we're not saying these non-moral values are bad. I'm not trying to set up a dichotomy, like one side good, the other bad. It's not all black and white, because we do have goals and we do want to pursue our self-interest. But the point is that that should not be your sole concern in life. They are a means to an end we wish to achieve, pleasure. Non-moral values include independence, prestige, fame, popularity, wealth, which we desire for the most part because we think they will bring us greater personal happiness. When buying a car, a person who places non-moral values above moral values might base their decision on stylishness, cost, and a desire to impress people. A person who places moral values above non-moral ones, in contrast, might place more emphasis on fuel efficiency, environmental friendliness. Although many Americans regard non-moral values such as career success, financial prosperity, and flashy materialism as the means to happiness, there is in fact little correlation between prosperity or level of income and happiness, except at the lowest levels of income. On the other hand, there is a positive correlation between level of moral reasoning and critical thinking ability. And that's not surprising, given that critical thinking requires not only that we be aware of our values, but that we be open-minded and willing to respect other people's concerns. So the last point mentioned there in the book is that people who are more skilled and effective at reasoning logically, which is the skill that we've been trying to develop throughout the semester, also seem a little bit better at weighing moral decisions and engaged in moral reasoning and weighing all the complex and subtle factors and gray areas that come in addressing and facing complex moral debates, issues, and questions. So good logical reasoning helps somewhat to assist in effective moral reasoning. So there's a little bit of a carryover between just being able to compute logical arguments and determine their validity and soundness, and being able to weigh moral arguments on either side to come up with your own conclusions on those. So now the next point in the text that we will begin with on Thursday talks about the conscience and how that is this like inner source of knowledge about right and wrong. And then we'll talk about moral sentiments, which are emotional states that alert us to moral situations and make us want to do the right thing there. We will then talk a little bit about the stages of moral development that a person goes through in life, which is discussed in Chapter 9 also. And then finally, we'll get into moral theory, and that'll be like the capstone of Chapter 9, where we will talk about utilitarian ethics, Kantian ethics, and also some moral relativist theories. So for those that think morality is not universal, you'll get a full airing of that view as well, that morality is based on individual opinion, or that morality is based on a cultural norm. We'll look at that and compare it against moral universalism, which comes from the work of Mill and Kant, and in some case Aristotle, who talked about virtue theory. So that gives us a sense of the scope of the next couple meetings. So there's just 2 more lectures on Chapter 9. Go ahead and read the assigned pages for that, and make sure to try to have some progress on your 4th homework assignment. You got some time still, 10 days until midnight Friday, but it would be best if you at least identify a show to watch or something before the last minute. Sometimes that's what throws people off with this assignment. Okay, well, we only have 1 minute left in the official time, so let me see if everybody's good to go. And if that's good, then let me know in the chat. I'll close our stream, and I'll be in touch. If you need anything through email or anything, you can email me in the meantime, and I'll be seeing you back on Thursday. So are we all right? Let me know. Okay, thank you so much, Lan, and everybody else. Sorry once again about the disconnection that happened momentarily earlier in the meeting. Like I say, you can simply refer to the first 15 minutes or so of the lecture that I posted from the prior class hour, and then you'll get all the same information back. And it was just about how to do assignment 4, and then like some initial comments about what ethics is. Most of everything was found in our own meeting here. Okay, good. Thanks again. Have a great day. I'll be talking to you guys on Thursday. Until then, have a good one. I'll see you soon.